Hi everyone, my name is Nico. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this structure here in Houdini, and then we're going to bring it over to Omniverse. So what I've done is I've created one outer layer and two inner layers. I also made a glass dome on top and also a bottom half dome. And what we can do as well is after we've done this, we can also create booleans for entrances and other things that we want. But for now, let's just leave it as that. We'll just basically create this object, and I'm going to show you how I've done that. So we're going to do it from scratch. So we're going to start from creating a normal geometry. So just a geo, and let's drop that. Let's dive into it. Let's create a sphere, polygon, and polygon type. And now I'm really zoomed out here, because I was using it before. So now you can see here, that's my little sphere. People cannot walk in that. So let's just zoom out and create and just change the radius. So we're going to go with 100, 40 meter height and 100. So it's not going to be massively tall, but it's going to be pretty wide. So that's what we're going to basically start from. So from this, we're going to create this. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first of all increase the frequency. So let's go with say 40. That should give us enough triangles, and that should be good. Okay. Now next, what we want to do is drop a Voronoi Fracture. I guess I'm pronouncing it right. So it's a Voronoi Fracture. That's what we're dropping in here. So the Voronoi Fracture requires two inputs. One is the geometry, and the other one is the Voronoi points. We don't have points, but we do have the geometry, which is this one. So if we go ahead and click this, it's not going to work. There's nothing there. So let's go back to the sphere and create some points. So let's drop a scatter node that will give us the points. And let's have a look. Too many, so we're going to drop the size down to 500. From here, we're going to go and remove the relax iterations, and that should be good enough to feed it the points that it needs. So the Voronoi Fracture is now going to have the geometry from the sphere and the points from the scatter, and this is what's going to happen here now. So you can actually see the points, where the points are, and the fractures are mirroring those points. So if you want more fractures, you can increase the scatters, or you can also change the details around the Voronoi Fracture. Now the fracture itself just creates the fracturing between these planes. So if we go down to the, so this is the Voronoi Fracture node. So if you scroll all the way down, you're gonna find this section here, it's called cut. We're gonna change this to 3D cut. And we're going to now increase the cut plane offset to say 0.75. And now you should start seeing it fractured. There it is. So the size of the fracture depth here, so you can actually see the gaps. That's what we want. We want the gaps to create that organic look. And then we're going to pass it through the VDBs. However, how do we get that? So the way you're going to do that is using booleans. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a boolean node, but I'm not going to use it yet. So I'm just going to drop it here, I'm going to place it there for the time being. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a transform node, and let's grab a transform node, there it is. And I'm going to create essentially another version of the sphere, which is here. So it's basically two spheres, one here, one here. So I'm going to subtract the output of the transform node, which is from this sphere, from the Voronoi fractured version. So I'm just going to feed this transform to geometry A, feed this to geometry B, which is input, the second input, and let me have a look at the boolean. Okay, that looks horrible. Okay, the reason for it is because we're subtracting solids from solids. And so what we've got to do now is just go straight into the boolean. We've got set A, which is this transform, minus the Voronoi. What we want is we want the surface. We don't care about the solid. So that's now what we're getting here. Now we're getting the surface view rather than the solid view. But look at that. It's crazy messy. This is not what we want. So the hack here is essentially just go to the transform and reduce the uniform scale to say 0.99. Now that should give you that nice clean look here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can now start adding the VDBs. So what the next step is to just pretty much drop a VDB. So we're going to do a VDB to polygons. There it is. And let's just open that up. Now we can see here that, so we need to provide a volume because right now this is just flat. So what we got to do is before we go to the VDBs, because the VDB is trying to basically extract something from a flat surface, it's not going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an extrude node, a poly extrude to be exact, before that, okay? And let's just go into this node for a sec. Now what we want to do is we want to extrude outwards. So let's add 0.7. Let's add a little bit more, make it a little bit more chunky. There we go. But we also want to make sure that the back of the extrude is also filled in. Now you can see that it's extruded all the way around and it's more or less uniform as far as depth. We could probably go to 1. Now that gives it that sort of nice round look. And that's it. So now we can go back to the VDBs and now we should be seeing some volume. So if we go here, there it is. So now the volume's there, fantastic. Now we're going to leave the setting as 0.1. Now if you change this, if you make the voxel size smaller, it's going to make these edges sharper, so you don't want it to be too small. And if you make it too big or too large, it's going to get really lumpy later on, so we don't want that either. So you have to play around with the voxel size, but leave it at 0.1 for the time being. If you're following this particular tutorial verbatim, just leave it the way it is for now. So 0.133, and you'll see why a little bit later on. Next, what we want to do is we want to basically smooth it. So we'll go to VDB smooth, gives you a little bit more control. So let's just drop that node there. Okay, so it's giving us a little bit of smoothness, which is what we want. Now also gives us a little bit more control, so we can add more iterations. So it's getting it flatter. So the more iterations you place, the closer it's going to be to the original model, right? And the lower the iterations, it's going to be a little bit more rounder and lumpy. So now, just you can play with that. This gives you another setting, but what I like to do is go from mean value to Gaussian. And the reason why you're going to see in a bit. So when just look at this particular plane, it's cooking for now. See how it's making it a little bit rounder. The Gaussian is making the geo a lot more rounder. So let's just go with that for the time being. So Gaussian 1 and 4 for iterations. Now again, if you increase the iterations, so if I go to say 8, we can look at the impact. And it's going to flatten it out a little bit more, make it thinner and make it more organic. See, notice how it's more organic now. So if you back out, you'll see what I mean, right? So you can just muck around and play with some of these settings and just keep on going from there. Now, and the lower this is, the thicker it's going to be. And that's how you can manage the actual the Voronoi structure, if that makes sense. Now, from here, what we want to do is we want to go from VDB smooth. Now we want to drop another node, which is a convert from VDB to polygons. So we drop a convert. If I could spell, that'd be great. Convert VDB. That's fine. We've done it. And what we want to do is convert the volume to polygons. And there we have it, folks. So we've got the entire polygon ready, set, go. Now if I go here and look at the polygon counts, there's 5 million polygons that are creating this structure. We can do a polygon reduce a little bit later on, but for now, let's just leave it as it is. So let me just flatten this structure a little bit. It's a little bit all over the place. Okay, great. Now, what I like to do now is drop a group node. So I'm going to create a group. and I'm going to call this group GRP outer shell. Okay, and I'm going to give it a color just so I can see the difference a little bit later on. So I'm just going to give it a color. Let's go with, yeah, let's go with something a little bit brighter like that. And I'm going to give it a null node. And so I could call it if I need to, this particular one later on. And I'm going to change the shape. I like changing the shape for these things. And also the color to black. That should be fine. Okay, so now this is one shell, which is the outer shell, but notice that it's top and bottom. Now what I want to do is I want to introduce a clip, so I want to clip it in half. So I'm going to go between the convert VDB and the group, and I'm just going to put a clip node so I can clip it nicely like so, but it's clipping it sort of vertically, so I want to clip it horizontally. So I zero out the X and give 1 to the direction there. So now it's clipping it correctly, which is excellent. Okay. And yeah, now again, if I want to change how this looks, I can always go back at any point in time, add more scatters if I like, or I could change the size of the cut scenes or the actual cut elements of the fracture. So I could do that, or I can change what I'm doing from the poly extrude it more, extrude it less. I think I extrude it by 1 here, which is fine. I can then change the VDB smoothness of it, which is where the tricky part is really, but it gives you a lot of control of what you want to do. So if I increase this, say, to 0.2, so I make it more chunky, and I have a look at what the end result is. Again, we're not caching much here, but notice how when I did that, so I increased that, what happened? It all just vanished. Now, why it vanished was because the smoothing needs to match the iterations. So if I reduce the iterations, I should see it back again. There it is, it's coming back in, back in, back in, there, right? There. So it's back again, and you can play around with all of this however you wish. So if I go back and change my polygons back to 0.1, it will give me that round look. But again, you can play with this all you want, and you can get a lot of different and interesting shapes out of it. So now let me go back to the 0. So I want to increase the smoothness, so it's a little bit more rounded. All right, now one thing for sure is I want to basically increase the cutoff plane, so I'm going to go to 1 to make it a little bit thicker. So it was 0.75 before, so it's a little bit thicker. And what I can do as well is, because it's a little bit, it's kind of more flat, so what I can do is make the extrude 0.1 as well to give it a little bit more thickness, and that will give it a bit more give it a bit more of a rounded look. Now, once you're happy with the look of the dome building, and you're okay with what you've got, let me just highlight that. So once you're happy with what you've got there at the moment, and you think, okay, well, this is something I can definitely take to the bank, what you can do from then on is just pretty much make a duplicate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the very top sphere, and it's going to be my master sphere, and then I'm going to drop a transform node and make another version of the same transform, but make it smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this one as 0.98. So it's going to be a tiny one, right? Well, not tiny, but smaller. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this whole section, hold down the Alt key and left mouse button and just move to the right. It's going to create another version of this whole thing, but a little bit smaller. So it's going to be like one inside the other. Now I just have to rewire everything. So this is a transformed node, which is essentially 98% of the original. So it's 2% smaller than the original. So then I just have to rewire everything. Okay, so what we have here is we've got two trains. We've got the original, which is here, and also the new one, which is over there. Now notice how it does take a little bit of time to cook up. So if you are waiting for a long time for things to be reconnected, what you can do is add a cache right after the Voronoi fractures, and that will basically speed things up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it for the time being as I'm structuring it, and I'm just going to allow for me to wait a little bit until I get the right type of geometry, because you then have to click resave the cache every single time you make a modification at this level. Once you completed make a modification at this level, then and all you have to do is make modifications at the bottom, then this is the time to create a cache, which I'm going to do right now. So I'm done with structuring the outer layer. So this is the layer that I want. This is exactly the structure that I want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a file cache over here, and it should create one there. Now I'm going to save my file because I have not saved it yet. So save as. Okay, so I've saved that. Now if I go to the file, let me check out where is it going to save it. Yep, it's saving in the right location. Great. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to remove the simulation, so it's not a simulation as such. I'm going to remove the time dependency because I'm not time dependent at all. It's just basically a single frame. So you can go single frame, and then you can do it this way, or you can just go no time dependency. That will just remove it. So these are the two different ways you can do it. It doesn't really matter. So next, all I do is just save it to the disk. So it saves the entire Voronoi fracture and loads it from the disk. So what I do is I do the exact same thing over here. So I do a file save. Now before I do that, so I'll do the caching for this one, but for this one over here I have not finished yet. So this one here I still have to do some work, and I'll show you why. So if I do a merge where I can see both of these nodes side by side, so I'm just going to grab this merge node, drop it here. So I've got this null and I've got this second null, and if I put my eye on both of these, notice how they are exactly the same side by side. So I want them to be off-centered. So the way I'm going to off-center them is essentially go back up, go to the scatter, and I'm going to add a different seed for the scatter. Now that should offset them. Now you can choose any seed you want as long as it's not the same as the first one. Yep. So now you can see how they are different. Now what I like to do is make sure that the outer one is the thickest, and then it gets thinner and thinner the closer you go in. So what I'm going to do at the same time is go into the Voronoi fracture number 2 and drop this down to say 0.75. And there you go. So it's a little bit thinner. You can see the different thicknesses. So now all we have to do is simply grab this whole train here and hold down Alt and make a copy. So by having the 3 different trains, train 1, train 2, train 3, we can now modify each individually however we wish. Okay, we can color them differently, etc. So now what we've got group 1, group 2, and group 3. Now the thing is that this particular 2 groups are called the same thing, so we need to change this to outer shell 1 and outer shell 2. Okay, so we've got outer shell original 1 and 2. And what we can do is also change the color from gray, from white to darker, and we'll also change this color to even more darker, and connect the null to merge so we can see them side by side. So it's good to merge them together so you can actually see what you need to correct before you start caching it, and if you can wait just a little bit for it to cook. If the cook time is so large, then by all means cache first, then modify, then reload the cache or save a new cache and then reload it again. Okay, now what's happening here is, since I copied it, I did not change the scale or the size of it. So what I'm going to do here is go by another 2%. So it's 0.96 is the inner one. So I'm evening it out. So we went down 2%. I'm going to go again down to another 2% from the original. So now we should see it popping right behind the dark gray one as soon as the cooking is complete. And again, I'm dealing with high polys. I can do this in many ways. One is reduce the poly count and play with that, but I'm just sort of keeping it simple for the time being. So now you can see the super dark gray one is exactly overlaying the second one that's right behind. So what we will need to do is change the scatter node. Now let's go to say 10. So we're changing the global seed of the scatter node, and now it should give us a different pattern, but it's going to be the same size. So we're going to reduce the size once more. Excellent. So now we've got the patterns that we want. We are going to cache the second train. Now, before we go on to the next part, so now you can see how it looks like. So we're sort of adding more and more. It's like looking like a bit of a nest or an inverted nest. So let's now just add a cache on the second one, so we don't need to wait so long for things to cook up. Okay, so the next thing is to go back to the third one, and now we want to change the thickness once more. So the dark one needs to be a bit thinner than the light gray one. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go here and drop this down to maybe 0.5. Make it a little bit thinner. There we go. So you can see how that's starting to look. Now, what I do recommend is that when you're building buildings like this, it's good to make sure that the inner layers are getting thicker in their scatter, so they're looking a little bit more dense. Even though they're thinner, they're also there's more of them. So we just go to scatter and maybe increase this up to say 1000, and this will add more fraction points to the geometry, because there's a lot more points to deal with. So notice how now the inner layer, the most inner layer, is more fracture points and it's getting a little bit more dense. So let's do it again. Let's go, so maybe we should do 1500, make it a little bit more dense, and also save to disk is probably a good time now. So just make sure file cache name is there. Good. So now we're going to just go ahead and hit save, and also go back to the original and also increase the scatter count from 500 to say 750, and let's save to disk a new version of that. So that will basically add a little bit more density to the second layer. So so layer number one, which is the outermost, is the widest. Then we go a little bit inner, and that's becoming more dense, and the dark gray one is the most dense one. So just adding different separations with regards to density and shape and fracturing. So that's going to give it a nice, there we go. So now you can see how that's shaping up. So what we can do, we can choose to add one more layer, right? That's always an option. Or we can just go with what we have currently. So now the next part of this is to create the glass dome. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to grab all these I'm going to move them to the side. Now, the innermost layer is going to define the shape of our dome glass, and that's going to come from this node. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another transform node here. Now that's going to help us form the shape of the glass glass dome. So we're going to feed the transform 5 node, which is the innermost layer, to a new transform node. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight that node, and we are also going to shadow highlight, ghost highlight the actual shape of the innermost frame geometry. So that's the innermost geometry, which is the last one here, combined with this brand new transformation. So what we're going to do is just going to drop it slightly. So we're going to make sure that this is underneath, a little bit smaller, say 98. So now you can actually see all the geometry of the innermost layer, and it's layered such that the glass is essentially a little bit lower, so it's actually inside. So there's a bit of a gap between the innermost layer and the glass, which is fine. So what we want to do also is add some thickness to the glass. So we're going to go ahead and extrude, poly extrude, just add some thickness to it, and we're going to basically go in, so maybe 0.5. So that should give us the thickness that we're after between the two geometries. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run a clip. So I'm going to clip the geometry the same way I did with the other geometries. So just going to clip it there. So I should be able to see the clipped version, which is in the wrong direction. Let me just correct that. So that's 1 and 0. There we go. And notice that the clipping there we go. Now we can see the inner layer and the outer layer, and notice how it's kind of cutting there. So this is the actual glass itself, so the glass layer. So what I want to do, yeah, so I can basically remove this or change this later if I like, but what I want to do is just make it a little bit thinner, maybe a 0.1. That should be fine. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so now I've got my dome, but what I do not want is I don't want the dome to go all the way down. I could actually have it cut off there and then just have another object that's highlighting where the people will be walking in, and that's always an option. So we can leave it as it is, or we can basically hemorrhage, have 2 domes, one dome at the top and then just a band, like a ring band around the bottom part, and that would require 2 clips. So what I want to do for now is just leave it as it is, and let me just see if I can see the 2. Yeah, so you can see the separation here of the dome. Now to clip it, I could basically tap or cap, poly cap it. So that would basically close off the entire dome. So it's like that, or I can do triangulation or what have you. Or in this case, I don't want to do poly. What I want to do is I want to clip it, but also fill in the polygons where the clip's been performed. So if I go here, I can just go click, and now it's closing off this particular gap that was there before. So now it's watertight, if that makes sense. Okay, cool. So this is my dome. Now, what I don't want is I don't want the dome to go all the way down, so I'm going to basically cut it off at about 4 meter height. So I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to add 4 meters. So it's only clipping it there till there. So the dome glass, or the glass dome, is only coming up to this height, which is going to be really cool because it's going to give you this sort of nice ground look down the bottom. Now you can, and I do recommend you actually create a wall here, which you can make invisible at any point in time. So if you want to create a different contrast between the dome glass and the wall that's separating the people and the dome itself, you can do that later. So what I do recommend is doing this, copy and paste that. So we've got the same structure, but this time, instead of clipping from 4 to 1, so from the bottom ground up, what you do is you basically change it so that the clipping starts like that. So it's actually so it starts from 4 minus 1, right? So you basically decide to clip it from bottom up, right? And then what you do is you clip from bottom down. So you remove the last bit. So I'm going to clip again. And this time, again, I want a 1 and 0. And there we have it. Okay, so now you got the bottom part and you got the top part. So all that's left to be done is basically link them to the merge node, which I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to bring this down, merge it. And this node as well. Merge that. Now I also want to create groups as well so that we can see the separation of color. So I'm going to grab and create another group here. Group create, and I'm going to call this group for GRP dome glass, right? And let's give it a color. And I'm going to just have this stand out a lot. Pink. Yeah. And then I'm also going to do the same thing here. Group. Create group. Where are you? There you are. And I'm going to do the same here. Group. Dome. Lower part, and also give this a color. And let's do this one as green. Okay. Oh, hang on. Let's do that after here. And actually, I should be clipping this before, so I'm going to grab these two nodes and I'm going to put them in here. Okay, so there we go. And the same thing here. I should have done it earlier, but my mistake. So I'm just going to grab this group, dump it here, and change the color. Dump it here. And this color is going to be green. So now if I highlight my merge node, I should be getting the whole thing. There we go, right? So now let me just save the file. Okay, now it's all saved and it looks really, really good. So now the next step is obviously you can add more and more and more separations and Voronoi fractures, etc. And what else you can do is also create Boolean openings for where people can walk into the complex. So that gives you a little bit more of an interesting feel to it. Or you can just remove the entire group, which is this one down the bottom, and so to create passageway for people to go in and out through the large doorways. So this gives you a lot of freedom of what you want to do with this particular object, but it does give you an idea of how this whole thing works. Next thing is to basically just simply go to stage, and we're going to export this out to Omniverse. So if I go to USB and so import. So a good way to do that is by doing a SOP import, which is just this one at a time. So you SOP import, so you can do a SOP import for say the first shell. Just copy this node and do this next group. And all that's left right now is to provide it a USB ROP. So you can see here, everything's imported, everything's where it should be, and all that's required right now is just a USB ROP, which is going to be quite straightforward. And all we have to do here is go like this, USD ROP. And then we can basically save this to disk. And all that we need to do here is just give it a name, and you'll basically save it to the file location that we need it to save. So we'll save it to the geo, that's fine. And there's nothing else that we need to do here. It just makes sure it's flatten implicit layers. So just flatten all those implicit layers. And all we have to do now is just hit save. Next, I'm opening my VS Code, and I'm just going to basically run my USD Composer. So I'm just going to go ahead and backslash and okay, so now I should be able to select one of these. So I'm just going to select the USD Composer. Okay, we're back here. So I'm just going to add the first one. Now you can see that it's really large, so it's right there. And I'm going to add the second one. So it's right on top of that one, third one, fourth, and fifth. Okay, great. So now you can see that it's all there. I've just changed my colors to, it's going to do sunny. This sort of gives you that sunny look, right? So from now on, we're just going to use the material tab and add the materials to the complex, to the building, including the glass and the outer 3 layers. So let's see how this all lands. Hopefully it's going to be really nice. Okay, folks, well, that's it. So all that now is remaining is just rendering it, and yeah, it'll be fun to see what you guys do with it. But in essence, that's how you basically create this kind of organic look using Houdini, which is here, and using Omniverse thereafter, and working out how to best layer it out and create a nice story. Okay, thank you guys. Bye for now.